The Metal Max series has had a fairly long history, though for those outside of Japan, they would not know the series' existence. This is due to the series rarely leaving Japan, though there has been an instance where the series came overseas to the West through the spin-off game Metal Saga in 2005. Unfortunately, that would be the only taste of Metal Max that the West would receive, at least until 2018, where the sixth entry in the series, Metal Max Xeno, was brought over to the West by publisher Nippon Ichi Software America for the PlayStation 4. In 2020, a revamped version of the game called Metal Max Xeno Reborn was released for the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch in Japan, but then this version would go on to be released worldwide in June of 2022 by publisher PQ. Metal Max Xeno Reborn is a post-apocalyptic RPG where you play a metal-armed man named Talus. Or in my playthrough's case, Dave. We'll talk about that later. You find yourself in an abandoned tunnel surrounded by killer robots until you come across a well-intact tank. After fighting your way out the tunnel, you find yourself in a desert wasteland, later to be revealed of what remains of Tokyo, now renamed to be Dystopia, which is infested with monsters roaming about. You eventually come across Iron Base, and after killing some monsters, you are recruited to help fight back against the threat known as the Suns. The AI android you meet at Iron Base, Poenmu, informs you of a looming threat towering over the base known as Catastropis, and you are tasked with destroying it and other monsters and threats you encounter in this Tokyo. You are also given contract jobs via a wanted list of some of the biggest, baddest monsters you will find in the overworld, which once defeated will give you a nice payout. You also scavenge around for resources in the overworld that you can use to craft different parts for your tank back at Iron Base. Eventually, you will gain access to a metal detector which not only lets you find more items but also broken down vehicles you can make use of while exploring. You will also run into different survivors who you can bring back to Iron Base, and they will also join you on your adventure as a party member. With the heavy emphasis on exploration, scavenging, upgrading, and monster hunting, is Metal Max Xeno Reborn a good entry point for the Western fanbase? Or should it have stayed an obscure series in Japan? For transparency, a review code for the PC version of Metal Max Xeno Reborn was provided courtesy of the publisher. Let's take a look at what works in Metal Max Xeno Reborn in the good. The game will give you a lot of tutorials at the beginning, but once it opens up, things really start to get interesting, as you have your main objective but are free to explore wherever you want. The game takes a non-linear and open world approach to its gameplay, so you could, in theory, go through the entire map at the start of the game. More on this later. During your journey, you may fulfill tasks you may have been unaware of or haven't been assigned yet. Thankfully, the game will recognize you completing the quest if you get assigned it later, and already fulfill the requirements for it, negating any need to have to repeat steps in-game. Fulfilling requests gives you EXP, and thankfully, in addition to the main quests, there are many side quests you can fulfill for extra experience points, which range from scavenging for scraps, to finding new music records and liquor, to even upgrading your tank parts. Speaking of, a large component of Metal Max Xeno Reborn is finding, crafting, and buying new parts for your vehicles. There are loads of customization options you can make for your vehicles with different cannons, machine guns, missile and projectile launchers, and different engines to power them all. The customization can get so wild, you can even deck out a city bus with machine gun turrets and a cannon that shoots a giant sword. Each weapon has its own properties and applications to make the best use of them, so it creates opportunities for players to play around with them and strategize what equipment to bring with them when exploring. There are even chips you can equip to your vehicles that can give additional properties to both the weapons and the vehicles themselves. You will want to do some planning ahead, since some enemies deep within Dystopia can pack a huge punch and may lead you and your party to getting wiped. Thankfully, the only real penalty to dying is getting sent back to Iron Base, and you lose nothing, at least on normal difficulty. This will give you a chance to respec your vehicles to better handle the enemy you got taken out by, and there's nothing more satisfying than defeating the large wanted enemies with your customized vehicles. There's one last thing that needs to be brought up that is such an integral part of this game, and really is the big highlight of the entire thing. And that is Pochi. Pochi the good boy, best doggo, 10 out of 10, whip pet again. Unfortunately, an enemy will most likely kill him in battle, which will open your eyes to the various issues this game has. So, we'll be talking about what doesn't work in Metal Max Xeno Reborn as we look at the bad. So, remember when I mentioned earlier I named the main character Dave? Well, that was not my original choice, as with tradition on this channel. I wanted to name him Guy Jean. But unfortunately, due to this game's restricted naming system, it wouldn't let me. At first, I thought it was due to the name itself, but it was actually due to the amount of characters you could use for a name being so low. This really hampered my experience since for every vehicle you find, you can name it, but since I can't name it what I want it to be, I usually settled on the default. The irony of this is that even some vehicles' default names are too big for the game, so you're forced to rename it if you want to pick it up. I wish this game wasn't so strict with the names due to another issue where in combat, your vehicle's parts can get damaged. Normally, when you select which vehicle to depart Iron Base with, it will use the name that you have given it when you found it. But when you need to use an item to fix it out in the overworld, the game will use its default name, which can quickly lead to confusion as to which vehicle you need to select to apply the repairs. More often than not, you'll end up repairing the wrong vehicle and will need to wait another turn to do the correct repairs. Same thing applies to the weapons you need to repair if any of them get damaged or destroyed. Also doesn't help that there's no helpful guide showing which weapon is attached to which vehicle either, so you're left to guess or fully memorize your vehicle's loadout to prevent any mistakes. On the topic of items, I absolutely hate having to navigate the item menu as it feels very slow to navigate when you want to use an item multiple times. After you use it the first time, you have to reopen your menu and slowly re-navigate back to the item you just used to use it again. God help you if you selected the wrong item and back out because the menu sends you right back up to the top of it, making using simple restoration items an annoyance. I should also bring up that every time you use an item, the game has to play an animation of the character using it. Normally, this wouldn't be an issue, but with how slow and clunky item navigation already is, having to constantly watch your character's animation play out to use the item quickly starts to wear on you. This becomes worse when you factor in the animation that has to play when your character exits and enters vehicles to use them. So much time is wasted on items that most players would rather just tough it out until it is absolutely necessary to use them. Since we're talking about characters entering and exiting vehicles, I hate how you have to perform extra steps to do those actions. You have to open the menu, select exit vehicle, select which vehicle will have characters exit from, then confirm it and they will climb out of the vehicle. The game should have just streamlined this to just a single or two button presses because having to constantly do that action slows the game's pace down to a crawl. Even though you have a vast open world to explore, it doesn't look particularly pleasing to the eyes. The game looks like a remaster of a 6th gen console game on the PC with its washed out textures that are very apparent on buildings you run into. Driving around in the world can also become a headache since the vehicles have very clunky controls and make you feel like you're fighting the controls more than the actual enemies. Speaking of fighting, there's 3 different phases to how an enemy encounter will take place. The enemy will spot you and a bar will fill up, and once it's full, you will be taken into battle against it. If you attack before the bar completely fills up, you can do some damage before the battle starts. You can also attack the enemy, and if your attack is strong enough, it will defeat the enemy instantly without triggering a battle. It's a decent system, but it's completely hampered down by how you attack enemies with vehicles outside of normal combat. In normal combat, you can select from a menu which enemy you want to target. Outside of normal combat, you have to manually aim your weapon, which quickly becomes tedious to how slow the aiming speed is. Also, it doesn't help when you want to aim for an enemy and they're either too far away or too high up in the sky for your aim to reach. The devs should have streamlined things to have your vehicle lock onto enemies and let you select which gun you want to shoot them with. Even though this game gives you a lot of tutorials in the beginning, it still fails to explain very important mechanics properly that you will need to know for the game. For starters, how to read the enemy descriptions when you lock onto them, which typically lists elements and colored bars that coincided with them. Sometimes the bars were filled up while others were a fourth filled up, and some bars were blue while others were red. The game never explains that blue means the enemy resists that element, while red indicates they're weak against it, so most players will assume that the colors indicate the level of how weak they are to the element. The game also doesn't explain which enemies will absorb which elements, so you'll never know when any of your attacks will unintentionally heal the enemy. Certain elemental properties of your attacks will weaken the enemy in certain ways, but you'll have to figure out which ones does what since the game doesn't tell you. The game not telling you all this information makes preparing your tank for battle a tedious headache. Another mechanic the game does not explain are how your party members' skill trees work. Next to each of the characters' names are small icons that don't make sense at first glance. Upon further inspection, the shape of each icon corresponds to a certain skill tree that a character specializes in, but at no point does the game inform you of that. Even worse is that even if you knew about the icons, you would still be left scratching your head as to which skill tree it corresponds with because the icons could fit multiple skill tree categories. The only way to see which skill trees contain unique character skills is by investing your skill points into it and hoping something good comes out of it. The game also doesn't tell you that certain weapons are proficient with certain characters. You just have to notice on the name highlight and let your gamer tuition tell you. Even if you don't figure it out, it's quite alright since your party members outside of their tanks do very little damage unless you're fighting enemies in a dungeon that are impossible to bring vehicles in. I also wish you could craft and modify human weapons like you can with vehicle weapons, since even though the dungeons are rare, you do need useful smaller weapons for smaller encounters or when your tank is too damaged to drive. Even though you get clear objectives for the game, it does not tell you the best way to go about it. If you attempt to blaze your way through the overworld, you will eventually encounter a wanted monster which, if you try to fight with just your default party at the beginning, will be completely annihilated by it. What you should do is acquire a full party and find vehicles in the overworld and fit them with equipment to best take on the wanted monsters. Again, the game doesn't tell you this and you're left to figure this out yourself, which would normally be fine in open world RPG games, but Metal Max Xeno Reborn isn't exactly open world. Even though theoretically you can explore the map freely at the start, you're still locked onto a narrow passageway of progression which causes you to run into these powerful enemies. Talus comes with a strong ability to help turn the tide against the wanted bosses, but you're not allowed to upgrade it until a specific part of the late game where you must die to an optional boss encounter in order to spawn the enemies that drop the upgrade material. This should have just been available at the start so you don't have to do another round through the overworld to collect the material to max out those upgrades. Also, if you somehow beat that encounter, you won't be able to access those specific enemies. I really hate how inconsistent descriptions can show up in this game, as item properties seem to display fine, but when it comes to weapons you attack with in combat, the game just expects you to keep those memorized. It also expects you to talk to your party members back at Iron Base if you want a morsel of story content, since this game is very bare bones in the story department. Each character will give you basic clip notes of themselves and the world, but that's it. Heck, I forgot Talus had a robotic arm and that was important to his character until a side character randomly brought it up in conversation. I also forgot you're not playing as a silent protagonist, but considering how little he talks in the game, can you blame me? There's so little story in this game that when the final boss dies, the game just ends with very little fanfare, if anything. There's more substance in the joke endings where you could choose to lay with the specified female waifu of your choice. On the PC version, there are some bugs and glitches that can cause soft locking issues when you can no longer select commands in the overworld after battle, or you can no longer move once you have returned to Iron Base. One final complaint I'd like to bring up has to do with the character art. During my time playing, I could not help but notice that the character art used does not match the models in-game. This really bothered me with Tony, who has a more pronounced chest in-game, while her art looked way off. I eventually learned that the art in the original Metal Max Xeno was by a different artist than the one from Reborn, as it featured art from Oda Non, while Reborn's art is done by Takashi Oga. You can use the original game's character art in Reborn, but only after you have beaten the game. This should have been an option available at the start of the game and feels like such a reward for completing the game. Now with all that out of the way, let's recharge our vitals with the opinion. Suffice to say, I did not enjoy playing Metal Max Xeno Reborn. It was a game with interesting ideas with none of the polish to make the game any more than a tedious slog. Once you figure out the gameplay loop, the game feels repetitive and there's only so much players will put up with before they'll drop the game entirely. It really felt like the devs wanted to make Reborn into an action-oriented RPG, but bogged it down with the turn-based RPG mechanics the series is known for at the last minute. A sequel was planned for Metal Max Xeno Reborn called Wild West, but at this time of writing it has been cancelled, and the IP was recently purchased by Side Games, so who knows where things will head. As it stands, Metal Max's first big foray outside of Japan is a hot mess, and may paint the rest of the series in a bad light. Hopefully there will be an opportunity in the future to bring over the older games, but only time will tell. And now it's time for my rating. I will give Metal Max Xeno Reborn this Dogecoin out of 10. Thanks for watching and tune in for the next Infinite Backlog review. If you enjoyed today's review, please check out some of our other videos and subscribe for more. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and our Facebook page. Once again, thank you for watching.